Yes, this is a hardcore grind interview with the dynamic Kimberly Jones. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
I thank you because I know you be busy, girl. You're always creating in your creative kitchen.
I'm trying. I'm outside.
Right. So, listen, I always like to start with a goal moment. And a goal moment is when thought and execution come together. A lot of times we're mindful about other people, what they do, how they do it. And when it comes to ourselves, we step light sometimes. And we're fearful in some of the things that we do, especially when we feel we're taking a bold step in the dark. Now, Black women have pioneered the literary industry for many years. What intrigues you the most about your writing and storytelling?
I think what intrigues me the most about my writing and storytelling is that it's first of all that I write in so many different spaces, which I know a lot of people find very hard to do. But I write op-eds, I write novels, and I'm also a screenwriter for TV and film. And so a lot of people, they either are just in one area or they venture off into another area long term, but I have always written in all three. I've had different points of entry in terms of visible success, but I have been able to successfully write in all three spaces in writing. So that's the part that I'm most, intrigued by and excited by.
Absolutely. Now, what writers have influenced you the most and why?
I would say definitely as on the novel side, I've been most influenced by Toni Morrison, just because of who she was as a writer, the type of stories that she told, and the fact that she was kind of a it girl, like when people go back and watch her documentary, she was in the mix of a lot of spaces. She was somewhat of a socialite, which is why she was able to have relationships with people in sports like Muhammad Ali, and then people in the movement like Angela Davis, and to champion their work as an editor, because I think sometimes people forget that she was just as prolific an editor as she was as an author. And so I'm very inspired by how she moved through so many spaces and so many worlds and had so many connections and meant so much to so many people in so many different spaces. I also feel very emotionally connected to Zora Neale Hurston because she was very misunderstood. She was not glorified amongst her peers. It was later in life that people really began to recognize who she was, her significance, and her importance. And I feel like I'm often misunderstood, or maybe, my fans are hardcore do or die, but I'm often left out of a lot of lists and a lot of rooms. And so I feel connected. I'm not comparing myself to Zora in any way, but I feel connected in the isolation of it at times. And as a screenwriter, I'm definitely most inspired by two people. When it comes to film, I'm most inspired by Robert Townsend. The way in which he crafts stories, beautifully crafts stories about Black people and Black culture, and kind of did it on his own terms, I'm very inspired by. And in TV, I'm really inspired by Issa Rae. The way she tells the stories of young Black women, both the ones we feel like we should celebrate and the ones we feel we shouldn't celebrate. And she does it, without missing a beat. I'm inspired by her. And on the journalist side, I'm most inspired by Ta-Nehisi Coates. Again, you can probably see the connection. I'm very inspired by people who show up in many different spaces, who have very strong political voices, and who are unapologetically Black.
I love it. Now, in 2020, your video gave a history lesson about the financial state of Black America using the monopoly metaphor. What was the passion behind that moment?
The passion behind that moment really was that, again, it was kind of like feeling, the odd man out in a situation that sparked that. I had been down on the front lines. Me and my dear friend Brandy, we had been down on the front lines. And so in this particular day, David Jones, a filmmaker, asked me to come out and do some man on the street for him. And I was really taken aback by many of Atlanta's Black bourgeois who were outside cleaning up the aftermath of the civil unrest that had happened here. And they had spent their own money to buy chemicals to get paint off the wall and to pick up trash and do all of this. And I'm like, have you made this same investment in marginalized Black communities? No, you have not. Well, here you are the day in the aftermath doing this cleanup, because every time I interviewed one of them, what I heard back was that they were concerned about the white gaze. They were concerned about the way in which this made us look to other people. And I found that problematic. So, at the beginning of my speech, I say I've been hearing a lot of things, mostly from rich Black people. That's what sparked me to start talking, and David turned the camera on me. And then in that, download, I guess I got from the ancestors at that moment, it led me down explaining the marginalization of Black people here in America and the roots of it, and why, I believed in what Dr. King said, is that riots were just the language of the unheard.
Yes. Now, you also wrote, How Can We Win? Talk about the importance of writing this book.
I wrote this because that book is an extension of that video, right? But I wanted it to be more solutionary. So the speech, the famous speech that went viral was How Can We Win? And it was from a place of exhaustion and feeling defeat in the argument. And so I wanted the book to be more positive, which is why I framed it as how we can win. So I went from how can we win, how can we win in this messed up system, to writing something called How We Can Win. And the full title of the book is How We Can Win, Race, History, and Changing the Money Game That's Rigged. So it was important for me, once I had expressed what was wrong, I'm a solution-based person, for me to write it and blow out that moment fully and explain, in more detail the history and how the history was impacting the present, but the tools that we can use both from the past and present to have a positive effect on the future, to exercise real change.
Yes. That's all funny. Now, as a Black woman, as a mother, and a businesswoman, what have you learned the most about yourself throughout your journey?
The one thing that I've learned the most about myself is to be honest with myself and to be honest with others, to be transparent with others about my authentic self, and that it will help me to navigate the world easier, and it will allow people to choose and decide if they want to navigate this world with me. I was diagnosed later in life. I'm in my late 40s. I was diagnosed in my 30s with ADHD, which is something I went throughout my entire academic career without knowing, but knowing. You know what I'm saying? Not knowing, but knowing. And the early stages of my adult life were not knowing, and just having the language to understand what was happening to me, where the procrastination was coming from, where the inability to focus sometimes was coming from, things that actually had held me back in my career, my inability to complete tasks at times, to get fixated on things that were not really important at the moment when I had more pressing matters that needed to be attended to. All of that really made a huge change in my life. And so in the early years of my diagnosis, the first thing I felt was what all neurodivergent people feel, which is shame. And I tried to create systems that were exclusive to me to help me combat it. But what really helped me get over the hump and really helped me learn myself and better communicate in the world was being transparent with people about my disability, what it looks like, the things I needed to manage, and how I needed them to interact with me to manage it. And I say that because that's true not only with the people in my life, but that was also true with my son. My son is now 17. So by the time I really got a handle on, hey, I have to be better about my communication about this, he was about 10. And so I would explain to him things like, hey, so mommy lives with this. And so here's how you help mommy. If you have a field trip and you have a sheet, get mommy to sit down and sign it right then, because that's going to increase the chance that it gets done. If there's a financial component to it, tell it to me on the day one and tell it to me as if though it has to be done today to activate the dopamine in my brain to let me know that I have to deal with it, so it's not the day of the trip and I'm rushing up to the school to try to do it. So mommy is very sad that sometimes she drops the ball with you, but it's important that you understand how mommy processes so we can create systems together so it doesn't have a negative effect on you.
I love it. And it's very important that we always communicate with our children when we are having difficulties or health issues, because in the instant we're a team and we have to work together, and your teammate can't work with you if they don't know what's going on. So I love that you had that conversation with him. Now, you inspire so many women and girls around the world. How does that make you feel to have such a powerful influence?
I think it's something that I always knew, even from a child, that I always somehow knew that one day that would be my responsibility. So I take the responsibility of it very seriously. And so I try to live in a way that beyond the words that I say, beyond the books that I put out, the initiatives that I run, whatever I'm doing, I try to do it in a way, I try to live in a way that is an example to them. I understand that I cannot both have degenerate behavior and then expect to be an example to young women on how to live, that I have to have discipline in the way in which I live. I have to have discipline in the way in which I present myself to the world. I have to have discipline in the way in which I interact in the world. And so I take it as a very serious responsibility. I don't chuck it away by saying things like, raise your own children, it's not my responsibility. I understand my place in the world, and I understand the impact I have in the world. Like, for example, I just found out a few weeks ago that they now teach me in Black history in German high schools. And so I realize now why I have so many German followers. I'm like, oh, teenagers in Germany are growing up viewing me the same way that I grew up, knowing Rosa Parks. And so that comes with a discipline in my behavior that is required. Not that I exercise perfectionism, because I'm very clear about my flaws. Like I said, I'm very open about my learning disability. I'm very open about the mistakes that I've made. I'm very open about my previous background that I had before I got here and how I grew and got better. But to me, the most revolutionary thing that you can do is self-improvement. And so I'm constantly trying to self-improve, and I'm constantly trying to model self-improvement.
I love it. Now, you were nominated for an NAACP Award for I'm Not Dying With You Tonight, which was co-written with author Gilly Segal. Talk a little bit about that for you.
Yeah, so Gilly Segal, one of my closest friends, she ran across this article about a group of kids during the civil unrest in Baltimore around the death of Freddie Gray. And this group of kids at Frederick Douglass High School when the civil unrest was coming and the police got wind that it was coming, one of the things that they did was close school early, but another thing that they did was shut down public transportation. And so there was this article she found about a group of kids who basically got trapped behind a police barricade, in the sense that they were not protesters or anything like that. They were just kids who went to that high school who, with public transportation shut down, could not get home. And so they were stuck in the civil unrest, and their parents couldn't get to them. And so when police barricades and things were put up, these kids are now trapped behind them just because they didn't have a way home. And so, we're both mothers. And so at the time in which she was reading the article, we had children who were just slightly younger than those kids would have been at the time. And so it struck a chord in her, and she felt like, as a white woman, that was not her story to tell. And so she came to me and she asked me if I wanted to write this story with her, and I said yes, and we decided to write it as a dual narrative about two teenage girls, one black and one white, who were caught in the middle of civil unrest, who were not young revolutionaries. In fact, quite the opposite, were just two young women who were caught. So these are two women who don't know each other, don't have a relationship, and they're caught in the middle of this. And so we thought it would be really cool to write it as a dual narrative where, we leapfrog the chapters and you get to see pieces of the story from Lena, the black character's perspective, and you get to see pieces of the story from Campbell, the white character's perspective. And really, as much as it is a book about race, it's even more a book about perspective.
Mm. Now, and this is how I met you, working with literature. And over the years, we've seen literature change so many ways. But when we're thinking about African American literature, what do you feel are the greatest challenges authors are facing?
Well, I think the biggest challenge that authors are facing is there's not enough. I mean, we have tons of black writers. I hear lots of people saying all the time we need more black writers. I'm like, are y'all actually doing the due diligence to go procure the work of modern-day black writers? Because I'm on the road all the time. I'm meeting tons of them, and I'm talking about tons on both traditional publishing side as well as independently published sides, as well as ones who are published through small press. And so it's not that we lack writers, it's that we lack visibility. We don't have enough spaces and places where black authors and their work is being visible. And honestly, if I'm being honest, this is probably going to get me in trouble, but also our people culturally are not hunting the places and spaces where black authors exist and looking for them. Instead, they're just going online and saying things like, well, where is our next James Baldwin? Where is this person? Where is that person? And I'm like, they exist. There's Jason Reynolds. There's Nick Stone. There's, you know what I mean? There's Tahari Jones. There's all these amazing people, Tia Williams. There's all these amazing people writing amazing stuff, and you're not even looking for them. You're just yelling at the wind that they don't exist, and you have not run your fingers across the books in a bookstore anytime recently. You haven't gone to the black bookstores that exist and talked to a bookseller who can really tell you about these authors, or just go to any independent bookstore where you're going to have more seasoned booksellers who are going to know what's available in the world. The other thing is there are not enough black faces in the publishing houses. We don't have enough black editors. We don't have enough black publishers. We don't have enough black people with green light power that are hearing our stories, understanding where they fit in the market, and buying them. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, I have friends who are iconic music producers who were iconic music producers in eras that are very deeply meaningful to black people. And when I talk to editors at the major houses, like, hey, I have this friend and he's an icon and he is the foundation of trap music, or he is the foundation of snap music, and there would not be this thing without this amazing human being. And they're just like, oh, I just don't think this person would have the reach for what we're looking for. And I'm like, that's because you don't have the cultural references and markers to understand his reach and his importance and his significance and his value in the market. So yeah, I think that the issue is that we don't have enough Black faces in green light positions in the publishing world. And I think also there needs to be some due diligence of our people to seek out the Black writers that exist.
You're absolutely right about that. Now, you recently partnered with the dynamic Tamika Newhouse to open Lit Diaries. Talk a little bit about the store and the vision you ladies have.
Yeah, so Lit Diaries was a literary cultural space. It was part bookstore, part event space, more event space than bookstore. Our bookstore was a small bookstore, almost kind of like a gift shop at a space, if you will, because we had books and teas and tote bags and art and different things like that. And so really it was just a space where we wanted to exalt Black creatives across the board. We sold Black art. We had Black artists on the walls, and we sold their pieces. We had, multiple events weekly, from book signings to writing classes to writing meetups. We screened movies. We screened TV shows. For the artists that were on the wall, we always had 2 to 3 artists showcasing on the wall at a time. We would have art exhibits for them. So we did a lot of events to uplift Black artists. Now, we no longer have the space. The space did close, but, it made it a year, which everyone knows in business. If you make it a year in any brick-and-mortar business in modern age, that's a success story, So I think we were a little ahead of our time in terms of the area that we were in. It was in a developing area, and I just think the foot traffic wasn't there yet to sustain the space. But definitely the events many of them were epic and amazing. One thing people are still talking about in the city is, for Black History Month, we did a Harlem Renaissance costume party to honor the writers of the Harlem Renaissance. We had a nationally known jazz vocalists come in and sing songs of that era, and there was not one person who attended that party who did not dress for it. So, it was a happy space. It was a beautiful space where we met amazing creative people.
I love it. Now, you have a podcast coming up. Tell us a little bit about that, because first of all, country rap tunes. Let's talk about it. Come on now.
Yeah, I'm super excited about Country Rap Tunes. So Country Rap Tunes is a podcast that already exists. Country Rap Tunes is hosted by the legendary multi-platinum Grammy-nominated music producer Corey Moe. And it comes from, he had a very close, familiar relationship with the late rapper Pimp C from UGK. He was Pimp's exclusive engineer. Anything you heard Pimp's voice on, Corey Moe engineered it, because Corey Moe and Corey Moe's brother and Pimp C kind of grew up together and were good friends, and so Corey was like a little brother to Pimp. And so that was a phrase that Pimp C coined, calling Southern hip-hop country rap tunes. So it's an honor of him. And so Corey Moe has already been doing the podcast Country Rap Tunes, but he took a break during the pandemic. He didn't come back after the pandemic. He took a break, and so now he was ready to come back and bring the podcast back, and he wanted to do a rebrand. I always say it's very similar to Drink Champs. It's like Drink Champs, but specifically Southern, you know what I mean? And so he wanted to come back, reinvigorate the podcast, do a rebrand. And one of the things that he wanted to do with his rebrand is he had just been hosting the show solo, and so he wanted to bring in a co-host, and he and I had a conversation about it. I think it all started, like, I posted something on TikTok, because I have been trying to, not TikTok, on Instagram. I had multiple podcasts that I have been, a part of that kind of like got started, and then something would fall apart about it. I was working on this podcast called Gold Teeth and Baby Hair, And one of our primary hosts had an extreme tragedy happen in his family, which understandably derailed us getting that podcast off the ground. There was another podcast that I was supposed to do about an era of hip-hop that was being shopped and was supposed to, be mainstream and large scale, and, no one ever purchased it. And then I was just trying to get my own podcast. I wanted to take my brand, Hood Girl Heroes, and do a podcast and get that off the ground. And that never had. So I had all these false starts with podcasts. And so my, as the old saying goes, a closed mouth doesn't get fed. So I just made a post on Instagram one day like, hey, I've had all these false starts with podcasts. I feel like I have a voice for podcasts. And I don't know, can someone help me out? I'm just trying to navigate the waters of podcasting. Oh, and I even had another podcast, YTL, my literary podcast. Me and my friend Vanya were trying to get out the ground. We shopped it around to a couple podcast companies. There was one that expressed interest, and then that deal kind of fell apart. And so it's like 4 different failed podcasts. I'm like, I am doing something wrong here because I keep trying to get a podcast off the ground, and it's not working. And so I made this post on Instagram, like, what am I doing wrong, y'all? If y'all got some tips and advice for me, help me out. I have this huge following on social media. I have this voice in the world, and I cannot get a podcast off the ground. And Corey Moe just commented under it, was like, girl, call me. I got something for you. And so when he asked me to be his co-host on Country Rap Tunes, I was like, obviously this is a no-brainer. Like, Corey Moe is such a big deal. Like, he's actually nominated for 2 Grammys this year, and just to show the diversity in his work. One is for the work that he did on Killer Mike's album, and one is for the work that he did on the OG Jazz Artist album. So he's so diverse in his thinking, and so widespread in the music industry. He knows so many people, and he's worked on, with everybody from, Destiny's Child to K. Michelle to, 8Ball and MJG. So just his relationships alone are going to make this podcast very, robust and fun. And so he wanted to add, a fun, different kind of, current affairs person to the podcast, and I got the job.
Awesome. You know what? You be making these silent moves, and then all of a sudden, boom, there it is.
Yep. Yeah, so Country Rap Tunes launches in February 2024, and I'm, super looking forward to it.
I love it. Now, you are also starting a nonprofit, Vocation Venture. Talk about your vision behind that nonprofit and what you wanted to bring.
Yeah, so Vocation Venture, so I have, as you know, I have been a part of all of these social justice initiatives, whether it's things dealing with police brutality, to things dealing with police brutality, to maternal health, to housing, to the legal system, to legislation, all these things. And I'm going to be honest with you, I just started to feel so drained and like I was not filling my cup and that I was not giving the best, brightest version of myself to the fight because I was being pulled in so many different directions. And when 2020 happened, the civil unrest of 2020, and it was all hands on deck, and every social justice activist that was already active, like myself, to all the people who found, to the voices who found themselves in the movement in that moment, we all had to focus on police brutality because that was the charge at hand. Very much, in the same way, and now people feel very compelled and pulled towards, a ceasefire in the Middle East because, it's kind of an all hands on deck moment. But what I realized was a lot of us who were doing different types of work, we kept getting tugged at in different directions, and we're not focused on our task, and we were not making the main thing. And so I took a step back for a little while and really thought about what was important to me, what was the impact that I wanted to have in the world. And when I leave this earth, when it's time for me to become an ancestor, where will I have want my impact to be showcased? And so Vocation Ventures is me coming back and being like, I'm coming back and I'm ready to go. And I knew I know through all my messages, the connected dot was I want to have an impact on poverty. And so I thought of a way in which I could impact poverty, and I looked at a lot of statistics and did a lot of research, and I realized that Black people in particular were more economically sound when we were vocation-based, when we were electricians, plumbers, when we owned businesses for construction, cosmetologists, barbers, all this thing. And I realized that we are expecting everybody now to go off to college and get this brain mortgage, and we have demonized trades. But Black people were more efficient. The Black dollar was more circulating in our community when we were tradesmen. Now, do we need doctors, lawyers, therapists, engineers, and all these things? Obviously, that's a given. But we have left behind a whole generation of people who that was not their journey when a vocation could change their life, And so I'm looking at people who love, working in food service, and it's like we can transition these adults into going to culinary school and allowing them to be actual chefs, and it doesn't require a 4-year degree. I don't know if anybody's ever played a plumber or an electrician, but if you have, they are not a cheap trade. Neither is an HVAC guy. Neither is help desk if we're moving into the tech arena. And so my goal is to get young people and second career older people back into trade education and back into vocation. So that is what sparked Vocation Ventures. I am doing it with a very dear friend of mine, Philandis Thompson, is my partner on this. We held in 2022, we hosted our first, through another organization we were working with, the People's Uprising, we hosted a trade fair called Trading Up, and we had all of these vendors come out for trade schools, but also for trade level positions, 911 operators, things like that, city jobs, jobs and sanitation and things like that were also out, that also came out so we could give people secondary higher careers and help them to move out of poverty and be able to afford homes and upkeep in their community. And so Vocation Ventures is really going to be centered around getting people back into vocational work.
I love it. You got a new podcast. You have your new nonprofit. You have a new book coming out. With all of the things you've accomplished, what is next for you to do?
Of all the things that I've accomplished, the next thing, well, one of the very big things that I'm excited about is one of the books that I'm in the middle of writing. This book has already been purchased by Henry Holt, so this is going to be a Henry Holt release. I am in the process of watching The Robot Lady, which is a fictionalized telling of my mother's life. My mother was a leader in tech. I don't even know, not until we got older and started having these conversations with her did she even realize she was a leader in tech. My mother was part of a team that programmed robots, these mail bots that delivered the mail in the Sears Tower in 1976. And so my mother passed away in 2021, but she knew that this book was coming, so she left me a recording of her telling some of her stories, and she didn't get to finish telling me those stories, and so I have to take a lot of dramatic license with the story. So I am writing it as a fiction book, but it is definitely clearly going to be based on my mother's life and lived experience as it's centered around these mail bots. So that's like one of the things that's my life work. I always wanted the world to know who my mother was and to celebrate her. And so getting to do that is very important to me. So I'm very grateful that I'm getting to do that. And, future me, like super, super future me, like once I get past getting some stabilization of all these new ventures, and I feel pretty stable as a writer. My writing career is pretty stabilized, but once I get stabilized in, the podcast and Vocation Ventures and things like that, one of the side hustle things that I want to do that I've always dreamed about doing is I want to become a real estate investor. I really want to get heavily involved in real estate, in the procurement of land, and owning commercial real estate.
Go, girl. Okay. Well, I'm so proud of you. I am so proud of you. And I tell you this, but I am so proud of the moves that you make and the influence that you have and the books that you bring to life with your dynamic pen. I thank you so much for coming to share your time, space, and energy with me. I want you to shout out all of your social media where everybody can catch you and where they can grab your books.
Yes, people can find me on Instagram at Kimberly Latrice Jones. Actually, Kimberly Latrice Jones is where you can find me on both Instagram and TikTok, and those are the two places in which I live. And they can get my books via my website, which is KimberlyLatriceJones.com. That's www.KimberlyLatriceJones.com. And then also, I always tell people this, if you want to order anywhere outside of Amazon or anything like that, you can always order books from Brave and Kind Bookshop in Decatur, Georgia. It is a Black-owned, woman-led bookstore. I go by there every couple weeks and sign whatever stock they have. So chances are really high, and they do have online shopping, so you can online shop with them. And chances are really high that if you get a book written by me from them, that it's going to come signed.
I love it. I love it. And I thank you for coming to share your time, space, and energy, and I will talk to you soon.
I will talk to you soon. Thank you, girl.